In the early 70s, a secret video game company will develop a game that will sell thousands of copies, spawn 4 sequels, and be 1974's Game of the Year. It's 1974, and whilst at-home consoles started to appear on the market, the money-making games are still the ones you'd find in pubs and arcades. At the time, the arcade game market had 3 distinct roles. Manufacturers produced game machines, which they sold to distributors. These distributors handled various electronic machines and in turn sold them to location operators. But these distributors also had exclusivity agreements, meaning only one distributor per region carried products from a specific arcade game manufacturer. Atari, one of the biggest game manufacturers of the time, felt constrained by this distribution system. So in September 1973, they established a secret subsidiary called Key Games. The primary purpose of Key Games was to produce clones of Atari games, essentially doubling Atari's potential reach by offering their games through 2 separate entities. Key Games had its own manufacturing capabilities, giving them the ability to not only clone Atari games, but also develop original titles. During this period, Steve Bristow, the lead engineer at Key Games, conceived an idea for an original title, which would later become the iconic game Tank. Tank was a game changer for Atari. It even led to the release of sequels and spin-offs like Tank 2, Tank 3, Tank 8, and Ultra Tank. So unfortunately, I could not find an online emulated version of Tank, the original game, but I have found something that is very, very similar. This is Combat. It was developed for the Atari 2600 in 1977, and one of the things I have found really interesting in researching these games is seeing how quickly the sequels were released. The original Tank and its sequel Tank 2 were both released in 1974, the same year, just a few short months after each other, or just a couple of months after. And then Tank 3 released in 1975, which was the 3rd arcade machine. So they were just making updates and then just calling it like the next sequel and shipping it out as the sequel. It was so quick. You could not imagine a sequel coming out so close together or in the same year today for any game. But given that these games were relatively simple, it makes sense that it can happen so quickly. So this is Combat. We're currently looking at one of the maps and it is very, very similar except for the fact it doesn't have landmines. But I think the reason they got rid of the landmines is because they've added in some additional game modes that make it more interesting. Obviously, this is a 2-player game, but it's just me playing it just to check out the mechanics, the gameplay, kind of show you a bit about how Tank would have worked and show you, I guess, what they did for Combat and sequels, because this is a sequel to Tank, one of the many sequels. And I am playing on keyboard. Obviously, you don't have the set of joysticks that you would have with the arcade cabinet. These sound effects, I cannot get over how ear-drilling the sound effects are on all original arcade cabinets. Like, this is the sounds that you were playing to. Let me just bam. There is a slight difference to the sound effects. So this is just the static of sitting still, and you can tell when I start driving the tank that there is a difference in the sound. Very clearly you can tell when someone starts driving the tank, and that is going to be important later when I show you a different game mode. But I do have to add that the original game was in black and white. So this is more accurate to what you would have seen on an arcade machine, just with those landmines in the center. This is one of the additional game modes that I was talking about, which makes things a little bit interesting. So if I press start, you might be thinking, where are the tanks? And if I move around, you can hear that sound difference that I was talking about. And that is because in this game mode, you are playing as invisible tanks and you only become visible when you shoot. And when you begin moving again, you become invisible. So you're both trying to find each other while you are both invisible. You become visible when you shoot, but also the shells bounce off the walls and the obstacles, which I guess they needed, because I think if you were playing both of you invisible and the shells only shot straight, I think it'd be very difficult for anyone to actually win. You kind of need that chaotic bounce to hopefully hit someone. But if I can get the other tank, I think the becoming visible, sometimes you need to shoot just to know where you are, because if you start driving for a while, I don't actually know where I am right now. Oh look, I had no idea. I thought I was in the middle of the screen and it was over there. So that is essentially the essence of Tank gameplay and combat gameplay and all the Tank game sequels that came about after this. This is just your classic war combat game, and I can see the appeal of 2 people playing this in an arcade or a pub back in the 70s and 80s. I hope you learned as much as I did when researching for this video. If you think you can guess what the top game of 1975 will be, make sure to leave it in the comments below before the next installment of Game of the Year.